John, John C., Hamilton, Ontario. Can't help. Close to Toronto, where my children live. John, it's awesome just simply to say that you are 50 years in sobriety. And in my early sobriety in New York, my first sponsor, when he heard of somebody celebrating, I think the 43rd sobriety anniversary, said, well, 43 years, that's good starting. It's a good beginning. So it's fantastic. It's amazing. I'm closing in on 10 years, so I don't know whether I have the time, 65 years old, whether I will ever have the privilege to hear that I have 50 years of sobriety, maybe in another life. And John, you're practicing and you're teaching evidence-based methods to improve well-being, utilizing exercises and principles to see lasting change. And that's something that right now 114 people are interested in. So let me say, I'm shutting up. Over to you. We will be all very, very exciting to hear what you have to share. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stefan. It's good to know that I've had a good start. I love that. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I welcome you to this workshop, and I just want you to focus for a moment just before I introduce myself. There was a reason or intention that you came here with, and there was something that you wanted to either share or give or get. And I want you to be very conscious of that. I want you to be very conscious, as well as having an open mind and listening, to make sure that you get what you came for. And it may, life is funny. We may come with an intention and we don't get that intention, but we walk away with something very different. And this requires something that is very important to our topic today in self-acceptance. And that is the growth mindset, the willingness and the ability to be open to new ideas. Now, that is not a pattern that I'm used to having, being closed-minded and critical, defining or defending what I believe and what I know. So it takes something to practice about this openness, this idea about being present to the resources that are available to me today, right in this moment, to be able to listen for creatively and actively. That there might be something here that really might just change my heart and mind and life. So I am an alcoholic, and I've been sober for 50 years, like Stefan said. And I belong to a meditation group. And the reason I'm going to mention that is this isn't a spiritual talk at all. But I want you to know that my program comes from a spiritual beginning, and that's important for me to know, because I may be crossing some boundaries here that may make you uncomfortable. And it's not my purpose to make you uncomfortable, but I want you to come to realize about things of mental health. This idea of emotional and cognitive sobriety requires development. It requires more than prayer. Prayer is a wonderful place to start. And I like to believe that God is causing me, in the curiosity and interest I have, to develop skill sets that's required for me to have what I call emotional regulation and cognitive logic, to be able to make choices in my life and make better decisions. So that's kind of the background of today. And what you're going to hear from me is not philosophical ideas or concepts, not just even my experience. What you're going to hear from me is what I like to think of it as a work person's guide to emotional sobriety. In other words, a how-to. And oftentimes what I've noticed over the years that people just don't know what to do about having something like emotional sobriety. They're just not sure. And what they're hoping for is that somehow, one day, someday, this will all fall into place. And all of a sudden they wake up and they feel that they have this idea of emotional and cognitive sobriety. They pray hard, which is a great thing to do, and they go back to God and keep asking or requesting this benefit. But many times what happens is people, it's always out of their reach. They just can't seem to grasp it. They're hoping that the 12 steps will satisfy this emotional and cognitive sobriety. And I'll tell you, sometimes that does work, but we get different results from the steps that we take because we're different people. And what's really important is we need to discover for ourselves what is our true experience of having taken these steps, working with others, being in service, praying and meditating. Am I having emotional sobriety? See, there might be something more or additional that's needed. And when I've come to the conclusion of this, in my case, I needed something more. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to say this is very interesting to me. That, it's like, let me just give you an analogy. It's like me buying a diet book, reading it, and wondering when the weight is going to come off. You see, that's irrational to think that way. It takes more than reading a diet book. It actually takes action to implement the suggestions that's in the book. So day after day, over time, one may be able to lose weight, not because of what they read, but because of what they do. Now, that's very obvious. I mean, anybody can see my wrist. I have an iWatch on, and I bought it so I can track my walking time. But you know something? My walking hasn't changed since I put my iPhone, my iWatch on. It's still the same. See, it's not the device or the content that's important. What's really important is what I do. Now, that all makes common sense and logic, and I don't think anybody would disagree with what I was just saying. But now we move into the internal experience. So it's not outward anymore. It's inside. It is our internal experience of ourselves, about other human beings, and about circumstances and events in our life. How we relate to ourselves. How do we relate to another human being? How do we relate to our lives? See, that requires the same kind of skill set as does the diet book and the action. Prayer is wonderful and necessary, but it isn't sufficient. It requires action. And I put it this way, just to make it simple, for me to be able to convey it to you. You know, when I was drinking, I prayed to God, and I didn't have any other actions. I kept on drinking. And my prayers were from the heart, and I believe that they were from the heart, at least. And I was hoping that God was somehow, magically, I guess, mystically even, would allow me to stop drinking. And it never happened. What happened was that when I prayed to God, I had some insight to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, it took some action for me to fulfill what God was causing in me so that I could remain sober a day at a time. Now, God caused that in me, and I believe that to be true. But he didn't teach me the big book. He didn't teach me that at all. I had to go and study and to act out what the suggestions were in the big book for me to be able to maintain sobriety. And this is what I'm talking about when I refer to these ideas of emotional cognitive sobriety, is that we need to have actions in place, an intention in place that we can fulfill so that we approach this something called emotional regulation. So I'm going to share my screen. I got a little bit of a slide thing happening here. And hopefully I pulled up the wrong one, or the right one rather. So I want to introduce you to a couple of ideas. One is I'm going to introduce cognitive sobriety. It's a term maybe you haven't heard before, and it's not used very often. But the reason I've included cognitive sobriety, or the mind sobriety, is in page 23 of the big book. It talks about the alcoholic main problem centers in his or her mind. So it speaks about the big problem, the main problem of an addict speaks about how we think. So one would think that we need to practice better our thoughts, which ones to engage with, which ones to let go, and start to identify that train our thinking so that we can act on the better thoughts that we have and are willing to let go of unhealthy or unhelpful thoughts. Another word, a phrase I want you to be introduced to is sober flourishing. To flourish as a human being, we're no longer like a bird with a bruised wing because we had an addiction. We have been set free, and we can flourish in the life, free from the labels we put on ourselves, free from the conclusions that we have about ourselves, and to participate in a life with full autonomy. And what I mean by autonomy is the ability to choose the kind of life that we're going to be leading. So we're no longer victims of other people or our addiction, our physical addiction. We're no longer victims of events and circumstances. We have the power to choose and how we relate to those things. So this is what I call sober flourishing. Every human being, there's an innate desire and need to grow. It's in every human being. You can deny it, but there'll be a nagging thing that happens with you. It would be, something's missing here. I need something more than what I'm doing. And you might say it, is this all there is? See, the human being needs to grow like everything in the universe. Everything in the universe is growing, is changing, and we need to understand that we grow and change as well. The more resistance we have to change, the less emotional sobriety we have. And that's just pure plumbing. So I'm John Cunningham. I'm a founder of Freedom Hour, and sometimes known in the emotional sobriety world as the God Guy, because I do workshops on expanding God consciousness in step 11. That's what I've been doing. And not to brag, this is one of the reasons why you're here today and why you may want to give me your undivided attention for the next hour. So let's understand something. We talk about emotional sobriety as if we can actually work on something called emotional sobriety. And if you were in the first workshop, you began to see the connectedness between our thinking and our behaviors and our emotions. So it's not like you can work on it directly. Now, you may notice when we talk about emotional sobriety, you may hear about an event, a difficulty or a challenge somebody has, and they go through it without drinking or without participating in their physical addiction. And that's wonderful. It's very good. Oftentimes you hear they're trying to control something, and that is not so good because it leaves them in a place of stress, anxiety. So if you're looking to have emotional sobriety, that topic is, you need to go deeper, I've found. You need to find what approaches do we have in emotional sobriety? And here are the 7 I use in my work that I do. One, we need to have the science of self-acceptance. Now, can you imagine trying to have emotional sobriety and all you're doing is criticizing yourself? You're condemning yourself. You're saying, why me? Here I go again. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't have enough money. All of these thoughts and feelings that I just expressed to you flies in the face of emotional sobriety. Now, it's there to keep you off balance. And for most addicts, we seem to be drawn into the drama of the darker side of our nature. And of course, what we're doing is moving away from emotional regulation when we're involved in that kind of self-criticism. So to be able to learn how to have self-acceptance, the ability to accept yourself as you are right now, not when you fix this or when you're doing something else other than what you're doing in the future, or what you should be doing instead of what you're doing. No, it is really about accepting you as yourself, weaknesses and all, at this moment, and saying, I am enough. I am enough. Now, this is a practice. This requires action. It requires working with some ideas and practicing something. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on in the workshop. Second approach to emotional sobriety is mindfulness for the 12-stepper. What does that really mean? It means that we are in the now. We are very much aware and awake without judgment, with understanding and curiosity. And we're connected to our body's sensations. And we're very much aware of our surroundings and what's happening within us and around us. When we're aware, when we're mindful, we're able to make better choices for ourselves. It is when we are in this, what the professionals will call the automation. Automation is a habit. When we are blinded by habit, we go through different patterns in our life. Some of them are not so helpful or healthy, and other ones are healthy and helpful. But we go through them, and we keep getting the results that we've always gotten. But we don't know it. We're not aware enough of what to do about it. So mindfulness helps us approach emotional sobriety. Next piece here is maximizing strengths. I love this one because I've been in the 12-step rules, been active for the 50 years of my sobriety. And to me, today, there is an overinvestment in our defects of character. We're always trying to fix ourselves, or we're trying to correct something, or we're listening to the inner critic, and we're trying to shape our behavior in a particular way. And we're twisting and turning. And that's what gives us that's what takes a lot of attention and energy, is focusing on our weaknesses. And we're ignoring maximizing our strengths. When I speak to people one-on-one, one of the things I ask them, would you mind sharing with me one thing that you believe is a weakness for you? And they can tell me and articulate it. They can give it me from all different angles. They can tell me the last time it happened to them, the consequences of it. They know everything about that particular weakness. And then I ask them this: what's good about you? I get the fish eyes almost 90% of the time. Fish eyes are like staring. They don't have no idea. They've lost sight of the fact that they have strengths, talents, virtues, purpose. Not because they don't have them, by the way. It's because they're not paying attention to them. So when you're actually over-investing in weaknesses, you're actually moving away from emotional sobriety rather than approaching it, which, if you're looking at your strengths, is a way to approach your emotional sobriety. So the areas in this case, we're doing a workshop on this later in the year about strength spotting, strength development, and strength expression. The more physical attention we give to those things, the closer we are to emotional sobriety. Coping and resiliency mechanisms. How do I deal with the things I need to deal with? How do I deal with my weaknesses? How do I, not trying to change the weaknesses, but how to work with them? You see, we set ourselves up and create our own difficulties. So trying to control things we have no control over. We don't have any control over the thought that comes to our head or how we feel about a certain situation. That's out of our control, if you believe it or not. So what we do when that emotion or thought comes, what we try to do now is try to control it. We try to get rid of it. We may suppress it. We may avoid it. We may do all those things thinking that is the way to live our life. But by creating that cycle, what happens is something that's called rumination, and the thought and the feeling keeps returning, and it seems bigger than it did the last time because our bodies are crying out, saying, paying attention to me, pay attention to me. I need to have this processed. And what we're doing is turning our heads because we're uncomfortable with how to deal with our weaknesses or some of our negative thoughts, and certainly some of the more overpowering emotions like fear and anxiety. So we learn different coping and resilient mechanisms and how to deal with it. So the word with is important here, to connect with these ideas. You know, one of the things we often talk about, and you hear around the rooms, is, look, I'm dealing with life on life's terms. That's a very popular phrase. People use it all the time. And yet they go away and they start trying to figure out how they can change the way in which they're experiencing something. So that's not dealing with life on life's terms. That's trying to change it and control it the way you want it to look like, rather than the experience that you're actually having. So you have this artificial way of experiencing life that isn't real. It's made up. I constructed it the way it is, rather than dealing with it the way it presents itself. Can you imagine trying to have emotional sobriety when you're in a poor relationship? Just imagine that maybe you're angry, or you're with the relationship with people that you're with, and maybe you're upset or frustrated. Maybe you're jealous. Maybe, any number of things that can crop up. Once again, we're moving away from emotional sobriety. It is our desire to develop positive relationships, to act in a way that approaches us, to better unite with people, that we approach emotional and cognitive sobriety. So we need to deal with what these emotions or these relationships that we have with other people. How to deal with goals and motivations. Many of us have gotten rid of goals because we feel that they're useless. Some of us claim we're going to live it a day at a time. We collapse this idea that living it a day at a time and goals are opposing each other, and they're not. Every human being works better about themselves when they have something to reach for. The problem is in the process of achieving goals, because for most of us, what we do, it's all about the outcomes. And as a result, if it's all about the outcomes, what we've done is our worthiness becomes unstable, because sometimes we reach the goals and sometimes we don't. When we reach a goal, we say, I'm worthy. However, when we don't reach the goal, we consider ourselves unworthy. So we create this unstableness, this emotional unstableness, the way in which we approach things like goals, which, of course, if you're able to focus on the process of the goals, the learning of the process, what you're discovering moment by moment, the outcome doesn't matter as much. And as a result of that, what we're doing when we discover what we're learning, as a result of that journey, what we're doing is approaching emotional sobriety, because we feel good about ourselves. See, when we feel good about ourselves, when we're satisfied, when we are enough, we are in this place called emotional and cognitive sobriety. And lastly, the training of the inner critic. I wonder how many people out there in this audience today have an inner critic. Well, every addict I've ever talked to, the inner critic is very strong. And it yells and it diminishes and it keeps reminding people of every mistake they've ever made in their life. And when that gets repeated, it points the finger at it, wagging the finger at yourself and saying, you know what, you're just not good enough. You're not good enough. Here you go again. Here you go again. And what do we do with that voice? You can't get rid of the voice. The voice is going to be there in our heads to the day or the moment that we pass on this earth. But can we train the inner critic into being an inner mentor? Can we develop that voice so it's more compassionate, more understanding? Is there something I can begin to train in that inner critic so it gives me the advice of a mentor rather than just a condemner? And of course, one way or the other, it either you approach emotional sobriety or you move away from emotional sobriety. So to me, these are the supporting things, the actions that I need to take to have an outcome directly related to emotional sobriety as I work on self-acceptance and mindfulness and developing my strengths, learning more coping and resiliency mechanisms, developing positive relationships, having goals and motivation, and training my inner critic. What I am actually doing, the result of which, the outcome of which, is this emotional regulation. Does that make sense? Now, this is what happens. We want to have emotional, and I've included cognitive sobriety. So we talk about it. We talk about it at a 30,000-foot level, as if we can all of a sudden turn a switch on and have emotional sobriety just by trying. And of course, the only resource we have at that moment then is our will. We don't have information to do it. We just have our will. And our will isn't very strong. And it's temporary. And what we do at that moment is that we give up. The other thing we do, because we don't practice proactively, so we're not building up our strengths, we do it in the worst possible moment. I'm going to practice emotional sobriety when I'm angry. That's like going to grocery shopping when you're hungry. That's not a wise thing to do. So if you're going to practice emotional sobriety only when you need it, you're going to find yourself scratching your head and thinking that you're just not good enough. You failed at this again. And what's the sense? See, it's what we do before we need the resources that count. So now we want to dig down that 30,000-foot level. We want to go to one area that we just talked about, and that's today's topic of self-acceptance. So let's look at self-acceptance. Another big topic. Can I start achieving self-acceptance because I want to achieve self-acceptance? The answer is probably no. Because your patterns are deep. They're ever-flowing. These old ideas that you carry with you, they may not appear every day, but they're still with you. And sometimes I consider it like a subterranean river that is always flowing, even though I may not consciously be aware of. So I need to have some sort of skill set to disrupt that river that runs underneath, that subterranean river. Let's go a little bit down deeper now. Now, I put down 4 things that will support self-acceptance, which will support emotional and cognitive sobriety. And one thing is, and we're going to work on this a little on the later part of the day, is gratitude. If I practice gratitude, I come to a place of appreciation. My consciousness gets altered immediately. That's one thing about being grateful. Your consciousness, you become warm, more kind, you become more loving, because you appreciate even the breath of life in which you're experiencing. So when you practice gratitude, we're more likely to be self-accepting than we would be if we weren't practicing gratitude and we're kind of taking on the next thing during our day. The other thing I want to point out is about rating our behaviors. Most of us rate ourselves. But the self-acceptance, we got to stop rating ourselves. Why? Because of this unstableness of worthiness. We have to learn to teach ourselves to rate our behaviors rather than myself. Give you an example. I've done step 10 for a lot of years. And I've always asked those 4 questions. Was I dishonest? Was I resentful, angry, or fearful? Was I those things? And I keep looking at the level of identity, those things, instead of asking myself this question: did I have behaviors that were dishonest? Now, why is that important? It's important to realize that I have a sacred identity. Going back to step 2, you talk about this idea of being restored. Being restored to what? Well, we saw restored to sanity is in the second step. But what we're being restored to is our original blessing, our wholeness, the way in which we were brought into the world. That has a sacredness to it called identity. And what I did for many years was pollute that garden with a bunch of weeds by saying, I am selfish. Well, you know what? I don't say that today. I am not selfish. I have selfish behaviors. And that distinction preserves my identity. And because it preserves my sacred identity, I can start learning how to self-accept myself, including the moments I have of behaving selfishly. Take a look at weaknesses. We talked about the overinvestment of weaknesses and how it defines me. See, it's no longer a weakness I have. It's who I am. And when I see myself by that identity, only by weaknesses, I am not very willing to self-accept. And if I'm not willing to self-accept, I've just taken a leg away from being emotional and cognitive sobriety. The other thing called a me story. Take self-acceptance masterclass that I have as an example. We talk about the me story and life as a process. A me story is really typically what happens in step 4, where you go back into your past and you look at all the incidents that you have and your resentments, your fears, and so on. And you build the argument. And the intention is wonderful, by the way. We become responsible. What should be our behaviors, not who we are. But we put labels on ourselves. We label ourselves. And we don't have all the information. Let me give you a little experiment here. I'm holding up a book with a piece of paper. Can you see it? And what you'll see is a blank page. And I ask you, each of you, to see the cloud in the paper. Do you see a cloud in the paper? Now, you wouldn't be able to see it if it was clear to you, because all it looks to you is a piece of clean paper. But then I start explaining something to you. If there was no cloud, there'd be no rain. And if there was no rain, there'd be no tree to grow. And if the tree couldn't grow, it can never be cut down and made into paper. So believe me when I say to you, there is a cloud in every piece of paper. That's the way it is with us and our weaknesses. We don't see the clouds in our behaviors. So we got to approach these things with kind of like a loose garment. This is the information I have, which I know is insufficient, but this is who I think that I could possibly be, or what behaviors I actually have. We want to open up the possibility that we're not either black or white, that somehow or another we're in a gray area of things. I'll just give you another piece of information here. If I say I'm selfish, and I admit to you that I'm selfish, and I talk to you about my defect of being selfish, what I am missing in the conversation all the times that I've been unselfish. So I'm only giving you a piece of my history. I'm not giving you the whole history. And in order to form an argument, in order to form an opinion about myself, I need to include everything as much as I possibly can. So always remember that we're not as clear or black and white as we think we are. The weaker we see, the more open we are to this idea, the more likely we can self-accept ourselves, because we don't need to condemn ourselves. There are things that are happening around us which we forget about when we're trying to make a point about a label that we have. So in the me story is about the history of the labels that I put on myself. So I come to a point where I say, okay, here are the facts. And it's not complete. And a lot of it is false. It doesn't mean I don't have to be responsible for my behaviors. I do. But I want you to appreciate the fact that we shouldn't be absolute about these things. We want to be open to other possibilities. We want to be able to see ourselves differently than what we're seeing. Now, underneath the gratitude, there may be several exercises I can do. So why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because I want you to realize if we don't get down to the grassroots here, to practice something, to have this self-acceptance, it is unlikely that I can achieve this emotional sobriety. So what I'm giving you is a structure, the working structure of to approach our emotional regulation. Now there's only 4 here. I can probably do about 8 or 9 things we need to look at for self-acceptance. But I just wanted to keep this brief to start for you to begin to see that it is in the weeds, the little practices that we do day in and day out, that's going to help us achieve what it is we want to achieve. And that is to be enough, to accept ourselves for who we are, because what we have is original blessing. Who we are has dignity. One of the exercises I tell people, and they laugh all the time, is you want to take yourself being a king or a queen and walk across the floor. No one has to be there, just by yourself, and kind of hold your chin up and your shoulders back. And as you're kind of walking, you're gliding with the dignity of royalty. And see how that feels for yourself, because this is what it means to flourish in life, to know that you're enough, to know that you have dignity, to know that you can handle anything that comes your way because you're equipped with the tools in which you need to have so that you can walk through things like storms in our life. This is what this means. So gratitude. What I do, I promise people they can have emotional sobriety in 5 minutes or less in a day. You don't have, this is not a big change where you're trying to change the direction of a large ship. It's like a canoe. We can change it very quickly. By practicing gratitude, the way in which I'm going to share with you later on, if you stay around, you're going to see that this can change your heart and mind immediately. Imagine that. Imagine that. Could you imagine doing a 6-minute practice that would change your life? And this is what we're going to discover together. So, what I've starting to give you is a breakthrough formula I have to achieve directly the emotional and cognitive sobriety, which I'm calling the sober, the flourishingly sober. And there's one thing that changes everything. And I'm going to share that with you in a few moments. But during our time together today, it's short. And I want you to understand that what I'm about to share with you is extremely important, although it may make you uncomfortable. I just want you to be prepared. I have some testimonies about it, but I'm not going to do them for you today. But I want you to know that you can do this. Though no matter how you think about yourself, what your thoughts have been, or the kinds of emotions that rise up in you, like fear or anxiety, stress, upset, that you could change this. You have the capacity, the God-given capacity to change it when you know how to deal with it. See, this is not your fault if you're still thinking negatively, or if you're still listening and responding to the master inner critic, or fear arises, or you remain isolated emotionally or physically. See, this is not your fault. It is simply that you don't know how to do something different, having a disruption to this automatic mechanism. Interest in emotional and cognitive sobriety is off the charts. Everybody's talking about it these days all of a sudden. It's interesting to see the flood of interest that comes around with it. And the groups are springing up with emotional sobriety conversations and so on. The relationship of the 12 steps has with emotional sobriety, the idea of conversations and talking about these things is off the charts. And I've noticed a big difference in the attention given to emotional sobriety. But be careful. Be careful that you buy into some emotional sobriety myths. And one of them I've already shared with you is about spiritual superstition. That God one day, someday will give you that. He's already causing you to take an interest in, and what we need to do is follow that cause and practice some skill sets that will give it to us. You see, I believe today there's 173 people on this call. God has caused each of you to be here. I believe that. He's raised your curiosity. You have an interest in. And the reason I have an interest in is you want to have something different in your life than what you're experiencing. And that's why you're here. So God has done his job. Now, what are you going to do with that? What are you planning to do with this conversation? See, where we fall short, friends, is we think we know something through conversation that is sufficient. And it isn't. It just isn't. Why waste a whole bunch of years wondering, trying to figure out, hoping, when you can actually put into practice small little increments that will get you closer to this idea of emotional regulation? I think today's recovered addicts are getting clever. They're really getting smarter about this. They're really starting to see that it takes a different practice than rather trying to thinking your way through life or feeling your way through life rather than acting your way through life. So we're getting smarter at this. We begin to see what I call the information illusion. The information illusion is that information is enough. That's why we buy books. That's why we listen to authorities or guru figures. We think the information is enough, but it isn't. I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but it just isn't. So using a system like I've just shown you, or something like it, you'll see results faster, easier, and plus it's simple. And I'm going to give you an exercise at the end of this conversation about gratitude in a way in which you may not have practiced gratitude before. And you will see that simple exercise has the potential of changing your hearts and mind. So my promise to you is that I'm going to give you some information that's going to be valuable to you if you choose to take it. So before we continue, are you skeptical? Or you think, is this guy crazy? What's up? I don't believe it. And then I'm glad of that. I'm happy because what I've done is just raise your interest and curiosity. So, but first I have to tell you a confession. How did I arrive here? How has this become such a passion for me and a mission in my life? I started a whole business around this because I saw it as a large missing in the conversations that we have in a 12-step room. Now, it didn't start from genius. I wished I could tell you that it did. It didn't. It started from a place of fire. That I arrived at one day in my sobriety, long-term sobriety, by the way, about 25 years sober. I started asking myself, is this enough? Is that all there is? There's something missing. And I was being driven by behaviors that I didn't quite understand, nor did I give any time to. But it was this idea that I needed more. I had to have more. And it didn't matter what I had, it wasn't enough. And I'm on a squirrel cage kind of wheel, running faster and faster, fast, like a dog chasing his tail, because I needed more. I needed bigger. I needed better. I thought it was ambition, but it was trying to fill a hole which I didn't even understand that I had, even after 25 years of sobriety. And I would say good sobriety. Like I wouldn't say that I was having bad sobriety, but there were still some hidden things there that I didn't see through my everyday recovery program. It caused me a lot of grief. I went through 2 bankruptcies, through my businesses, lost 2 marriages. That's how this looks like when I'm not paying attention to emotional sobriety. I'm left with these old patterns that never go away, by the way, friends. They never disappear. They hide. And unless they're treated, unless I process them, unless I deal with them, they're going to keep coming back at the worst possible times. And they did with me. So what I thought was ambition turned out to be just blatant greed and dissatisfaction. Working 18 hours a day, making lots of money, by the way, and I did. Driving around in a Mercedes Benz, but you know what? Once I took it off a lot, it was a used car. And it drove me to that place that I was so dissatisfied with myself. And I remember at Christmas, looking at that Christmas tree lit up, and I thought, this is the worst possible place I can be. I was gripped by fear. I didn't know what to do. And there I was, 25 years sober, looking for some answers. And something changed. Something changed. What I did was reach out to an external resources so that I could fulfill what it is I thought I needed, so that I could be a person that thrives and flourishes, so that I could be enough. And now I figured this out. And what I'm sharing with you today is part of what I've learned. And for the next several months, I'll be back doing different topics. Each topic is something that will be of value to you so you can approach emotional sobriety. So today I'm 75 years old. I started a new business last year. I'm engaged. I love what I'm doing. I'm connecting with people. I haven't been happier or more fulfilled than I am right now. The greed is no longer there. I'm able to process it and to understand what I need all through these practices, these different venues that I just shared with you earlier in that workshop. To practice these ideas so that they become mine. And then once they're mine, I can learn to live a life, what I would call freedom. I have freedom today as a result of it. I'm not driven by emotionally charged decisions. I'm very much aware of my experience, the surroundings around me. I'm very much living in the process and learning and having a growth mindset. I'm very much self-accepted. I smile when I make mistakes and see them as an opportunity to learn something rather than to condemn myself. See, all of this equates to a quality of life that I never knew before. I had no idea even existed. I was trying to force my way through life. Push. It doesn't have to be that way. This is a much easier and kinder, more compassionate way to live. So, what are the steps? And you'll notice I haven't even started talking about self-acceptance so much. I'm leading into it. There's steps to master the solution of what I call sober flourishing. And what are they? Well, first I gotta find a like-minded community. Now, everyone here belongs to a 12-step community, and I get it. But I'm talking about a unique, smaller community. a community of people, 2 or 3, 4 people that are interested in participating and practicing the actions it takes to have emotional sobriety. And when you connect with those 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, what will happen is that they will help you keep focused, because we're going to go off on a path somewhere. We're going to wander somewhere. We're going to kind of, if we try to do it ourselves, which many addicts are they keep wanting to do things themselves, keep it quiet, keep it a secret. If I fail, no one's going to know. But what I'm doing is writing a prescription for failure. Get into a like-minded community, and the like-minded communities needs to be very specific. People who are prepared and committed to taking action and moving towards emotional sobriety. This is key, friends. This is key. Now, I use evidence-based content to direct my actions. You may buy a book on the market that relates to emotional sobriety. But what I do is that I have these emotional-based exercises I do and share with people because they've been proven worldwide that they are effective. So it's not just my experience I'm relying on. I'm relying on the scientific community that have proven that these actions actually affect people more positively. So that get and have content that describes the place where you want to approach, so that you can start living by some of the recommendations of that book or whatever resource that you have. And lastly, find a leader, a mentor that's available to guide and direct your interest. When you're in the moment of these early stages, when you're practicing something new, you won't be very good at it. And it's going to be frustrating because you're not very good at it. And human beings don't like working at something that they're not very good at. This is why we give up. We don't have the competence to feel good about our actions, or our expectations are so high, there's no way that we can deliver on the outcomes. So we give up. If we had a kind leader who's been through that, who's gone to the other side of confusion into clarity, they can help guide you through those moments when you want to give up, that you want to put it aside, or when life simply gets in the way, you just don't think you have time to do the work. Find that leader or mentor. So here's the strategy to practice emotional sobriety. And it's all action-oriented. If you leave this meeting today, this workshop today, and you think to yourself, well, that was nice, well, that was horrible, whatever conclusion you come to, I got a lot out of that. Boy, oh boy, those are great ideas. You start talking to yourself and other people like that, but you don't put anything into action, it is a waste of time. It's a waste of time. So we want to identify your intention. What is it am I going to take away today that I'm going to put into action? And what I mean by action is something observable, some change in the way in which you're thinking, feeling, or doing something that you can see the difference. What is one thing? Not 10 things. You have to be careful of those or all or nothing thinking, friends. Or all or nothing thinking is what prevents us to getting into action. One thing you can practice that won't interfere with your busy lifestyle, that you can easily fit it in. Now we want to use your imagination. What will the outcome of that be like? Like, so for instance, let's say our outcome is to have self-acceptance. What would that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like to you? How will your significant others around you see a difference in you when you're fully self-accepting, that you're unconditionally self-accepting? And use your imagination so you kind of get used to this new way of being. And the more you use your imagination, the more likely you are to achieve it. I can see I'm running out of time here, friends. What are the predictable obstacles? If I want to lose weight, the first thing that comes to mind? Ice cream. It's right away, right away. You know, I got to go on a diet. Ice cream. It's see, there's a predictable obstacle already. It just shows up. What happens when I'm tempted to have ice cream? See, I already know that. So I go on a diet 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, having success 1 week or fine, 2 weeks, whatever it is. But somewhere I have to come up and deal with that obstacle of ice cream because it's going to show up. And if I haven't prepared myself with an if then strategy, if ice cream shows up, then I am fill in the blank. I am more likely going to be surprised at that and be knocked off my commitment. So therefore, I need to prepare for these predictable obstacles. And what's my implementation plan? How am I going to remember to do it? When am I going to do it? How long am I going to do it for? Am I going to put it in my calendar? Am I going to put a note on my mirror or my sun visor in the car? What exactly is my plan to implement this? So this is how to practice emotional sobriety. Have an intention, imagine what a possible outcome is, do an if-then strategy for obstacles, and have an absolute implementation plan. This, if followed, friends, is gold. It's gold. This is evidence-based goal setting, by the way. This is gold. Okay. So, we already talked about being in a like-minded community. It's a group of people with shared values, perspectives, and their life circumstances who come together to connect, share experience, and support one another in that particular area. So don't say, well, I belong to a 12-step group. Like for me, it's AA. That's a like-minded group. Yeah, it's really very general. It's general in a sense that we talk about alcohol and the abstinence of alcohol. We talk about the 12 steps, and we share about that on a very high level. What you don't hear very often is, this is what I'm doing today for my emotional sobriety. You don't hear that. This is the group, the small group, if you like, the micro group that you want to gather together so that you can actually act out what your intention is. It's extremely important. You know, my first step in all of this is underwhelming. It was difficult for me to do. And I'll just tell you what I did. About 25 years sober, roughly. I wasn't meditating. Now, I read all kinds of books on meditation. I could tell you how to meditate. I could explain it to you. I could tell you what to do. What I couldn't do is share my experience with you because I wasn't meditating myself. What I did was started a small group in AA, a meditation group, 11-step group, which is very popular these days. But back then it wasn't. I wanted to have like-minded people who wanted to meditate that weren't meditating. So I can share my frustrations, my defects, my concerns about not meditating, and to be encouraged to meditate on a daily basis. And you know what happened? It worked. The power of group. There's lots of studies been on this herd mentality. We used to say at AA, stick with the winners. It is because they give us direction. We become the people, the average of the people that we hang around with. And if you're hanging around with people who are not paying attention to emotional sobriety, then you're not going to pay attention to it as well. Doesn't make them bad people, by the way. Doesn't make them losers. It's just they're not paying attention to it. If you want to pay attention to emotional sobriety, find those few people in a community that you can participate in. So there's a secret to success. Like-minded community, have some sort of resources that are based in fact, and have a plan of action. So Brett just recently went through my course, and I just wanted to show you what results you can get within 9 weeks. Science self-acceptance class has been a life-changing in my view, my attitude, and my actions. I have long-term sobriety, and John's class got my attention at the deep level of how to let go of old ideas and labels and judgments that were invisible to me before. The change in my perspective and how I am in life has now been improved exponentially. I don't feel owned by my defects and my thoughts. They work for me now, and thank you for that. So this is what I do. It doesn't mean that you can't create something for you. What I'm showing you this for is for you to have hope, that you can have hope, but it might take you organizing it for the group, but it's worthwhile for you to do it. What is evident to me is that there is past-based language, what I'd done in the past, what my conditions were in the past. Oh, when I drank, I did this. It was past-based language. What I'm speaking about is a different conversation. Get used to having conversations that is like living in the language of your values. This is who I am. You know, I am kind and I'm loving. I'm supportive and nurturing. And to be able to share those values with people at the level of being present and moving into the future, nothing to do with the past. So it's like me creating me and you creating me. It's important, friends, to have this kinds of language and to participate in this kind of language so that you can have and achieve emotional sobriety. I hope you found that helpful. Now, what I'm going to do, and I'm running a little bit late, and I apologize for this, but what I want to do is this. I wanted to leave you with something that you can actually work on, that you can actually do, because I've talked a lot about some ideas here. So what can we actually do? Okay, so we're going to go through a 6-minute meditation together. And what I'd like you to do is to practice this. And what I'm going to do is give you this meditation if you're willing to give me your email address and join my blog. So I will put my email address in the chat in a few moments after we do the meditation. Then we'll open it up to questions and sharing. So I'm going to share this with you. And my hope is that you'll participate in this very short exercise.
Gratitude meditation. In this meditation, you are going to explore gratitude. Sit in a comfortable position. Close your eyes. Relax your body. And take 2 to 3 deep breaths. Now, think about something in your life that you are grateful for. Choose something in your life that fills you with a deep sense of appreciation. This can be a person, including your loved one, parent, child, partner, or friend. It may also be something you own, something you have been able to do, and some lesson life taught you, or something that did not happen. Just be sure you make it easy. Do not think of something you should be grateful for, but rather something that naturally creates a sense of gratitude. Try and get an image of it. See it in bright colors. Now, take some time to reflect on all the aspects of this person or thing for which you are grateful. List all the reasons why you feel grateful in your mind or out loud. Then, focus on what gratitude feels like. Notice the sensation of gratitude in your body. Where do you feel it in your body? Chest? Throat? Stomach? How does gratitude feel? Is it warm or cold? Soft or hard? Expanding or contracting? Simply pay attention to the feeling in your body without attempting to change it. Just allow the feeling to be present and take its natural course. After completing the steps above, you may focus on your breath again for a minute or so. Finally, open your eyes and broaden your awareness right out into the world around you, becoming aware of your external sensations of space, sound, touch, and light again.
Okay. So here was a very short gratitude. And what you were invited to do was to feel the gratefulness rather than just rationally look at it. Now, some of you may be doing this already and naturally, and that's wonderful. Good for you. But some of us are not. Like I'm very much in my head. When I make my gratitude list, it's very much a mental exercise. And there is some benefit to that. It's not like there's no benefit to it. However, what happens when you use your what we call experiential gratitude, our whole body, we begin to see and to relive and to savor the moment that we're grateful for. And we start looking for things that we're grateful for, like passing up an animal or a bird or being in the trees, for our very breath. We start searching for gratitude rather than something magnificent happens one day and I want to be grateful for it. Like an AA celebration as an example. Well, I'm grateful to be sober today. It's been X amount of years. No, we want to be able to use and search for and identify small things to be grateful for, and then to experience the gratitude again and again and again. What does that do? That moves us closer to self-acceptance because of the way it changes our consciousness. We're able to accept ourselves better. So this practice, although it doesn't relate directly to emotional sobriety, it is the roadway or the path to get us there.